In this tutorial, I'm going to show you some really cool features that Blender has. We're going to specifically look at this function called the transform orientation, and we're going to look at a similar related feature. It's actually very closely related, called orientation. And it can seem a little bit confusing because we have the same things in each of these menus, but I'm going to show you how they function relative to each other in the creation of an object. The label for this mince container that has arbitrary angles and axes that we need to very carefully maintain. Let's just take a look really quick at the actual label that is already modeled, and you can see it's wrapped around the object, and that is what we're going to create. And it has a very specific angle, as if there were a straight piece of paper that had been taken and wrapped around this. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I need to do is make sure I have selected the collection that I want this new object to drop into, and that's right here, label. I'm going to come into top view. Anytime I create a new object, it's created at the cursor's location. And I want this new object, which is just going to be basically a square polygon, to be dropped into about the location that we're going to create it. So I'm going to come over to the cursor tool, and I'm going to click on the top of this edge right there to establish its position, because the clear plastic down here is actually downset a little bit, and I want this to be created at the top level of this rim. So the next thing I can do is simply drag that and move it over to where I want it to be, and it will maintain the position of that original click point as far as the Z-axis goes. Press Shift and A, and we're going to create a new plane. It's going to be pretty enormous, so I'm going to come down here and type in a value of 1 inch. I'm using inches. If you want to convert this to a metric system, you can sure do that. Press the S key to scale this up just a little bit, and then the G key to sort of put it in position. The blue lines here are only a general guide. They don't need to be adhered to in an exact perfect way. Now, before we do anything else, we want to come over and apply the scale to that object. So we're going to come over here to the Move tool, press the Tab key, enter it, and I'm going to switch over to Vertex mode. And I would like to go to Selection Box so I can just marquee around the elements that I want. And then I can press the G key to move those down over about like that. Now that those are done, I'm going to delete those guides. I just put those in there to help us to put the initial geometry in place. So the next thing that we need to do is duplicate this, because the label will come down and wrap around the bottom and then come back to the top. And I have established this angle, and so we want to replicate that. I'm going to press the Tab key to leave edit mode, and then I'm going to press Shift and D, which is the same as coming up to the object menu, coming down to duplicate objects. Now it's going to move it, and I'm going to press the escape key because I don't want that to move right off the bat. And I'm going to come over to the front view so I can move this down very precisely down to the bottom. I'm going to zoom down because I want it to rest right on the bottom of the object. The bottom of the object is floating slightly because I made it so that the thickness of the paper would be accounted for. But it's got the same angle, and so what I'm going to do is, let's come back into the top view right here, press the Tab key. I'm going to enter X-ray mode so we can see through. And I'll do this in face mode so it's more visible. I'm going to press the A key, and then I'm going to press the S key, which is the same as coming over here to the scale tool, but it's going to be a little bit more interactive. S key, so we can begin scaling it, but I only want to scale along the Y-axis. So I'm going to press the Y key, and I want to do an exact inverse scaling, and I want it to be precise, so I'm going to type in -1, and it will snap to that value. Hit return, and then you can see along the Y-axis we have a value of -1 for scale. Now what's interesting, what it's done for us, is it's also inverted the normal. And that's a good thing. That's what we want it to do. I'm going to come down here, turn on normals, and you can see it's inverted the normal going downwards, which is the opposite of what the original one was. I'll leave that enabled for right now. I'm going to press the Tab key, and I'm going to hold the Shift key to select the original piece of geometry, bring up the context menu, and then we're going to join them together. Now I'm going to press the Tab key again, and I want to take this piece of geometry, which we already have selected, and I'm going to just move it. Let me reselect just that. I'm going to move that sort of an arbitrary angle. The reason I'm moving that down is I just want it to be sort of way off. I'm not going to try and eyeball it because we need to maintain this angle coming down the side and then back around. And the reason is for UV mapping purposes. When we UV unwrap this, we need it to be straight, or as close to straight as possible. And we'll look at that in a minute. So I'm going to come over here to this top edge. Now we're going to take a look at how we can start using the transform orientation here to really precisely guide this. If I come back into top view, I've selected this edge right here. And if we come up to the edge menu, we can invoke the Extrude Edge function. And I can get pretty close to eyeballing it to maintaining that angle, but I really would like it to be precise. So I'm going to undo that. In order to do that, what I first need to do is select this edge. You can see that our pivot, in some applications they call that the widget, is aligned to the global XYZ axis, and that's why it says global right here. So these are all the standard pivot orientations that we can have, and there's one in particular that's going to be useful, and that's normal. So let's talk about this for a minute. We have transform orientation here, and we have the same options over here. This over here is a kind of override for what is being done up here. Individual tools can be set to override this by selecting the tool and then defining how you want that tool's pivot to behave by default. If you just left it at default, it's just going to do whatever you set up here. So that's how this works. What I'm going to do is come to normal, and the pivot is going to reassign itself and align itself to that edge. And that's very useful. But if I come over here and I select this edge, it just changes itself to match that edge. But I want to extrude along this vector right here. So I'm going to come up here to transform orientation. I'm going to click the plus key. Now I can save this. So I'm going to call this top edge angle. Now when I come over here, let's switch to top view, it maintains that. And then I can press the E key to extrude that. It's still going to be freeform by default, so all I have to do is press the escape key, but that polygon that we created is still there. So now I can simply come over, since we're in the move tool, and move along that vector, and it's perfectly precise. And I'm going to bring this out, about that far. So what we want to do now is take this polygon and rotate it 90 degrees down, using this edge as the rotation axis. So what I'd like to do is, let's take a look at this in the top view to make this very clear. If I select this, we're still using the top edge angle, and I want to switch it to global because that happens to match the orientation of the edge. But when I switch over to face mode and select the polygon, the pivot is by default going to the center of the selected element, and I want it to be over here on this edge. So what I'm going to do is come into edge mode, select just that edge once again, and I'm going to press Shift and S so I can snap the cursor to the active element. Then when we come over back into face mode, it's still going to the center of the selection, but if I press the period key, now we can switch it so that the pivot point is at the 3D cursor location. Now when I switch over into rotation mode, it's right there. So we're combining global orientation with the custom pivot point for rotation, and I can rotate that down by exactly 90 degrees. So now when I come over here into the right view, we've maintained that angle coming down. So what we need to do now is just get this bottom edge matched up to this edge, to this duplicated and inverted piece of geometry that we created earlier. It's very easy. We're going to come over into edge mode. We're going to select this. And in this particular case, we could move it up along this edge by defining that angle. But it really would be just a bit easier in this case to come over to the slide tool. And you could see we could slide that up. But we really want to do it accurately so it snaps to that position. The way that we can do this is by using selection box. Let's take a look at this from an option standpoint. If you come over here and you switch it to active tool, that changes the way that the tool operates on the selected element. In this particular case, it allows me to simply grab it and move it. Okay, so that's really useful from a snapping standpoint, because now I'm going to turn on snapping, and I just want to make sure I'm in edge angle, because I'm going to snap this edge as I begin moving it up to this edge right here. So I've got a few edges going on. There we go. I could have also changed it. So let me undo, and I could grab this way, and this will be a little bit easier. That snapping is a bit easier right there. The next thing that we're going to do is now get this and match it up to that point. And I'm going to do this in face mode, selecting this. Blender has a really awesome snapping system that's pretty intelligent. If I come over here now and switch this to vertex point, I'm in face mode and I'm going to move it, but I'm just going to use the interactive move function, which is just simply pressing the G key close to the vertex that I want to snap. Now when I come over here, it'll get really close to there and it'll just snap it. It's really nice. Okay, so what we've done is we've modeled this in such a way that it wraps around and it maintains this correct angle coming down. I'm going to hold the shift key, select all three polygons, switch over into vertex mode. We want to weld these all together because these are unwelded here and here. Bring up the context menu, and then we're going to come down to the merge vertices function by distance. And the default distance will weld those two vertices together. Now let's jump over to the UV editor, and this will become apparent why we're going through some hoops here to get this precise. So I'm going to have us switch over to the UV edit area here, and I'm going to just switch over to a regular viewport shading there. Let's do this. Let's zoom out. Here we have the UV grid area. We have the three polygons selected that we want to UV map, so I'm going to come to the unwrap function of the UV menu, and we're going to unwrap that. Now, this is why we're going to the effort that we did, because it's unwrapped it in a nice straight line, because when we apply a bitmap label to it, we're going to be generating it as though we're actually going to be doing it for a real paper object that you need to print for, which is just going to be a long strip of paper that's wrapped around the object. That's kind of the goal of doing the steps that we're going through here. I'm going to come back to modeling, and now it's just a matter of adding some detail. And if we look at this from sort of the front view, we've overshot a little bit, and we really want this to be aligned right here. So let's do this. I'm going to now come over to our tool. I'm going to come back to the move tool. We're in vertex mode, and I want to be in X-ray view so I can do a select through since we're edge on. And I'm going to switch over here to select box so that I can marquee around vertices like this. Now take note, the options are for the pivot to be at the cursor location. And I'm going to switch that by pressing the period key, and we're going to go back to active element so it goes down there. Now we can't just move this along the standard axis left to right, because then we would be violating that angle that we want to maintain. So this is where I'm going to rotate the view just a little bit again, and we're going to come back over. I'm going to come back to edge mode, select this edge because that's the vector we want. We're going to switch back over into normal mode. There's the vector we want, so we're going to press the plus key, and I'm going to call this bottom edge angle. Okay, there we go. Now I reselect these. We're going to just ensure that we're in bottom edge angle, and we are. So that's correct. Now I can come back into the front view. I'm going to turn off snapping because that'll interfere with things here. And I can simply grab and move this till we get right down to about where we want. Come back to the top vertices, and we're just going to switch back here to top edge angle. Now we can move these until those are basically flush against the side of the tins. Now we need to adjust it a little bit so that we have the label coming down as though it's resting on this rim component. So we're going to switch back into face mode. Move around to select that because that's what we're going to operate on. I'm going to come back to this side mode because that's where we're most easily going to be able to see this here. I want to put a point right along here, and we're going to use the knife tool. So I'm going to press the K key. I'm going to click about right here and start moving until we get over and produce an edge right there. Now, if I wanted it to be exactly left to right along the x-axis, I could press the X key. But I need this to go slice all the way through, so I'm going to press the C key now, and that will just make sure it slices all the way through the polygon. I'm going to click, hit return to validate that. Now you can see it has sliced that right where we want it to be. Now in this particular case, when we come back into front view, switching into vertex mode, I can select box around those, and I'm going to switch back over here into global orientation because these we can simply move along the standard x-axis. There we go. So when we come over and we look at this from right to left, we still have that maintained angle. This could move along the x-axis without causing any violation to this angle that we're trying to maintain. Let's come back up to the top here. What I want to do is add some geometry that allows the paper label to wrap down from the top of the rim here into and attaching to the clear plastic. So we're going to come over to the loop cut function. Click, hold, and drag here, and I'm going to get right to about that location, and I'll do it one more time, and to about right there. Now what I'm going to do is switch over into face mode, select this face, and then what I'm going to do is switch over to the cursor tool. If I place the cursor by clicking on the top of the geometry there of the clear plastic, you can see they're at two different levels. They're just offset from each other a little bit. So I'm going to come over to the view menu, and I'm going to look at the fact that because we're in the global mode, I can look at the location right here knowing that I'm going to be getting the Z global value. Okay, so I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to come back up to item, and item for transform is I'm just going to now paste that here, paste, hit return, and it'll move that down to the cursor's location, which is really cool. Now it's just a matter of adding a bit of detail in. Okay, so, and you can see here, if we take a look at this, I think maybe this could be moved over with the move tool. This could be moved over. So if we look at this here, it's overlapping just a bit. So this is where I'm going to come back in, and I'm going to come down to top edge angle, and this will allow me to just move that off that, maintaining the correct angle. It's such a useful function. So the next thing that we're going to do is start adding some detail, and I'm going to start right here because this is very easy. This is going to be a subdivision surface object, and so we just need to add some constraining geometry in. We're going to come down to the bevel tool right here. We're going to set it to a value of 2, and we want the shape to be 1. That's very important. Now when I come over here, you can see what that does is it puts a new polygon on either side of the existing edge. And then we just need to do it to the top here. I'm going to select this edge, and here I'm going to put in these, which are going to be bounding polygons to some further subdivision geometry we're going to put in a minute. Come here, hold the shift key, select this, add the bounding geometry there. These are shallow curvature, so this is all we need for the subdivision to create nice smooth flowing curvature right there. Come to the bottom. Here, we'll do one that encompasses basically the curvature of the tin object. And then we're going to click this again, and we're going to switch this to a value of 4. And we're going to go back to the default of 0.5, which produces a rounded surface, a rounded fillet. And we'll come in to about like that so that the label wraps down. Let me turn off. The more geometry that we get, the more these normals get in the way. Click here. Now this is where I can switch over to active tool, and I don't have to worry about grabbing that widget if it's behind another user interface element. And I can simply grab the geometry and add the rounding right there. And there we go. Now on the bottom is going to be the symmetry point where we replicate it, so we need to get this edge right over to the center. And I modeled this in such a way that the core geometry was modeled left to right along the x-axis of the world orientation. So I'm going to come over here into edge mode, which we're in, grab this edge. We're going to come back down to the slide tool, but I want to enable snapping again. Edge mode is what we want. And since we're an active tool, I can grab any of these and I can move over until I snap to that center edge right there. And that gets us exactly where we need to be. I'm going to use the cut tool right here, the loop cut. I'm going to add one more cut right down the middle, but I need to turn snapping off first. Let me try that again. There we go. Okay, we're actually pretty close to being done. We're not too far off. So what we need to do now is replicate this, since we've got pretty much the core part of this done. So I'm going to press the Tab key to go back into object mode. We're going to come over and add a modifier. The modifier that we're going to add is simply the Mirror Modifier. By default, it attaches it to the object's origin. We really need to get the origin back to the symmetry point right here. So I'm going to press the Tab key to come back into Edit mode, come into Vertex mode, and I'm going to select that center vertex, press Shift and S. We're going to tell the cursor to the active element. Press the Tab key to leave Edit mode, and then we're going to come back up to the Object menu and we're going to set Origin to 3D Cursor. There you go. So that mirror function is operating around the object's origin, which is why we needed to get that there. Very important that you turn off the merge function because we don't want these merging at the center right there. Now we're going to come over here and we're going to apply this. Tab key to go back into edit mode. Let's come into X-ray so we can see through this. What I'm going to do is come into face mode, select any polygon on this side of it, and then we can come up to select. We're going to do a select linked to get that polygon island on that side selected. Then we're going to use the scale function. So we're going to press the S key. And we're only going to scale along the y-axis. So we press Y, and then just press -1, and then enter or return. That gives us the exact value that we need. Okay, now we're going to come back, and we're going to use that snapping function in vertex mode, and then just press the G key. In fact, let me zoom in so we can really see this a little bit closer here. Press the G key, and there we go. Snaps it into position. Okay, so what we need to do now is just weld these. So I'm going to come back to vertex mode. We need to switch over here to select box, and then select that. Now let me talk about this for a minute before we actually do anything else. I've been coming up here to drag, and it's a little bit confusing because we also have specific select tools. So for instance, if I were up here and I had my move tool in active mode, I could just press the W key to cycle up to the specific select tool, and if I press W, it will continue to cycle through the modes. So that way I could come over here and select this and then come back to the move tool, and it would still maintain its specific selection mode. It just is some nuance in the way the application works. Bring up the context menu when we're going to do merge by distance, and there it goes. It merges those 3 polygons. And then we turn off X-ray mode, and we have the label that's wrapped all the way around the object. Now when we come over here and UV map this, let's come back over to the UV editor. I'm going to come back into face mode, A key to select everything. What I want to do is actually make this easier without all of the container geometry there. So I'm going to press the question mark key, and then I'm going to have it switch over into a shaded view, and we're going to turn on face orientation. This is just another way of visualizing this. So you can see that when we mirrored that, it's flipped the geometry, and these need to be going in the correct direction. So I'm going to come back over to select. We're going to do that. Select linked. Now it's linked them. Come up to mesh, and we're going to come to normals, and we're going to do a recalculate outside, and that will get them all facing on the outside direction. That's very important for the UV mapper to work correctly. Okay, now we can just come back up here to UV Unwrap, and there we go. Now there is going to be a little bit of variance right here, and that's okay. Just the nature of the geometry ends up, and the unwrapping mechanism is trying to maintain the best possible 2D representation of each 3D polygon, and it's going to produce a slight amount of variation. But this is very easy to correct. If I come to this polygon, it's one I want to operate on, I'm going to switch over to edge mode, and I want to select that top edge, bring up the context menu, and we're going to do an auto aligned. It's going to look at it and it's going to say, well, the closest alignment is to the x-axis. So now I'm going to come to this one. I'm going to press Shift R, and it will do the same thing on each of those until we get this aligned. Then we come into face mode, select that again, bring up the context menu and do a follow active quads, and there we go. We get that straightened out. So now this is ready to do UV mapping, and I'm going to do a second video on this where I talk about more of the specifics about UV mapping and taking and reorienting this UV data.